Thank you, Professor Zulu. Even though we didn't have the same colonial experience, but then I can see some similarities. Like you said, up till date in Nigeria, we marry into the family, not to start a family. And just like you said, the mother-in-law becomes the mother, and that word cousin is actually, we find it difficult to use. We call ourselves brothers and sisters, even though we are cousins. However, changes have occurred. And part of the changes, because it used to be an agrarian society, there was need for a very large family and people lived together. But now, because of modernization and industrialization, people live in smaller units. And now we find the extended family system is falling apart. But I must mention that the extended family system served like what we'll call a social welfare system. The grandparents, uncles, aunties were always present to provide the services that we now have, that social workers now provide for the society. And lastly, I must also mention that in our own case in Nigeria, the children are now migrating. The young women and the young men. Good, the parents, the medical doctors, professionals, first of all migrated, came back home and assisted. Oh, remittance is a big thing back home in Nigeria. But now we have the unskilled. Irregular migration is now part of Nigeria, and we find our young girls who are not, some of them are not even educated. They are in the streets of Europe. And then that's our worry now about our family. The youth, they are now interested in migrating to Europe and to America. So thank you very much, Professor Zulu, because I saw a lot of what you have said in our system in Nigeria. Thank you.
I don't know how to pronounce your name, so excuse me for that. But I don't know whether you want to comment, to add a comment to her comment.
I agree. Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, Monsignor.
As you know, the Pope is very interested to study the question of the colonialism, as we discussed in the council. Maybe you can suggest something, because in your paper, the colonialism was really very important as cause of this change, we can say. So maybe it's one of the more important questions of the colonialism. So what is your impression about it?
Colonialism as in what?
You put the colonialism many times in your paper as thing to change this social situation.
Do I say I understand the question well? Colonialism as a cause or the source of change in the family structure, or just in the culture of the African people?
In all, in the culture, in the social structure, in the economy, in all, in the end. So,
to start with, colonialism was literally the source of lots of changes in Africa. It changed the economy, it changed the social structure, It changed the ideological structure. And this is mainly, in the first instance, because of the material artifacts that it brought into Africa. I mean, one of the most revered African writers on African history says that if there was ever a single institution that was responsible for the change in the entire social fabric of African society, it was the mission school and the mission education. And those came about after colonialism, or at times together with colonialism. In the case of South Africa, the entire educational system rested on the mission schools, such that by the year 1900, over 100 African graduates had graduated in American and English universities, all because of the mission schools in South Africa. The written word came into South Africa through the mission schools. And by 1877, Africans had started producing their own publication in the Cape. It was called Imvo Zabansundu, the ideas and feelings of Black people. And they had a press already doing that. So the clothing, for instance, I mean, today, if you go to South Africa in particular, you are hardly going to see anybody dressed in traditional attire. A number of people who come to South Africa say they thought they were coming to an African country. You could be coming into Europe with the predominance of Black people. Yeah. So colonialism and literally was the chief cause of the modern developments in Africa.
Yes, Professor Donati.
Congratulations, Zulu, fantastic and very touching. You know, the reality is very strong. It makes me think of the impact of colonialism, Marcelo, in the Americas as well. Indians in the Americas, indigenous peoples in the Americas, they used to live in single houses, large houses with many families. And as a result of colonialism, there was this imposition of a new urban structure or new house structure, which are individual families, which resembled Europe. And that has had huge impacts throughout Latin America. But my question to you, so I think the issue of colonialism is one that one can look through many angles. And I think the angle of indigenous peoples and the impact, the long-lasting impact of that. Today, many indigenous peoples' villages, they have individual houses just like Europe does and the urban parts of Latin America, where some traditional indigenous people still have these other structure with large houses. But my question to you is this picture that you described for the mining industry of South Africa and the impacts it has in the social structure. Is that something that you can generalize to other parts of Africa? Or how comfortable would you be to generalize this to other parts of the continent?
Yes and no. Yes, to the extent that the whole economy, mining changes the economy of any country. No, to the extent that I hear from a number of African friends, particularly from the Congo, that they do not have deep mining, which is very technologically dependent. South Africa is very, very deep mines. Some can go down as far as 4 kilometers underground. And therefore, to do that, you need a very extensive technology. So South African mining was therefore very peculiar to the extent that it demanded that. But because there was no labor, I mean, they were very relative in numbers. The white people could not sustain a mining industry, nor could they sustain a sugar industry. The coming of Indian people into South Africa was a function of the sugar industry, where natives, those were the indigenous Africans, did not want to, they were self-sufficient and did not want to go. So the government imported Indians in 1860. When that was not sufficient, they imposed what is called a hard tax. Every family had to pay a tax in cash. They were not allowed to sell a beast to get the money. Therefore, somebody from a family, in order to pay the annual hard tax, had to go and work either in the mines or in the sugar farms. So that's why I accentuate or emphasize the role of racial capitalism as a factor in the South African economy.
And yeah.
A sort of colonialism. It's not only colonialism for the European countries, but also in China, for example. Okay, this is very important. And it's real.
It's a form of economic colonialism with the collaboration of the African elite. It's no longer an imposed colonialism through armed conquest. In other words, if there is an influence of Chinese goods and an influence or a marked Chinese investment in South Africa in particular, it is with the collaboration of the South African government. And to a certain extent, I wouldn't rule out corrupt tendencies in that. South Africa is a member of what's called the BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa. And I think the BRICS influence means some form of preferential treatment for some investments. I'm not an expert on investment, but what I have noticed is that, for instance, South Africa had a sprawling chicken industry, what was called rainbow chickens, located not very far from Durban. That has almost all but disappeared, with much more inferior chicken quality coming from Brazil and the other things. Also, South Africa had a very advanced clothing industry, textile industry. That's also has been supplanted by the mass-produced goods from China that one sees in South African shops. But I refer to that as the corruption by the political elite in South Africa, using some ideological justification like BRICS for that.
And then Stefano.
Who is first? Okay. Very, very short observation, comment, Paulus. Thank you for your excellent paper. The question is about the Ubuntu principle. What is the interpretation of this Ubuntu principle? Because if you say you are because we are, there could be two different interpretations of this sentence. The first one is a collectivistic one. You are because we as a collectivity are. So it seems that the collectivity is superimposed to the single individual, to the single person. So in a way, it is very difficult to be accepted in a Western culture where the individual is evaluated so much, is appreciated not as an entity belonging to a collectivity superimposed to the individual, but because the individual is in relationship with other people. So the question is, does this sentence, "you are because we are," could be interpreted in a different way? That is, you are because you exist in a we relationship. You exist in a we relationship, but you are a you, not a we in yourself. I mean, your identity is a personal relational identity, not a collective identity superimposed to the person. I think that this observation is important in terms of how the person, the concept of human person, is understood in the Ubuntu principle. So it's just a comment, but if you want to react to this observation, I would be glad. Thank you.
Yeah, it's used in the sense, and it actually means that the individual and the collective are one. It's not the only one, it's a proverb, and it's not the only one in isolation. A corresponding one is inkosi, inkosi ngabantu. A chief is a chief because of his subjects. In other words, it's a relational expression. You cannot exist in isolation. And because you cannot exist in isolation, there are relational or reciprocal relationships between you and the collective. And the morality becomes a morality of obligations rather than a morality of rights.
No?
Yes. An observation, Paulus. The description that you made of the South African situation and also of other countries such as our friend Nigeria is not that much different from the situation that existed in Europe before the 11th century. The point is that we do not know history because, as you know, the model of city civilization was born in the 12th century. Before 12th century, city did not exist. And this model was born, as we know from history, in Italy, in Tuscany. Tuscany is the inventor of the model city. Before existed villages or groups, and the historians of medieval age, there is a big literature on that. And if you read that, there isn't, of course, mutatis mutandis, that much different from what you described. So that is important to keep here. And that is nothing to do with colonialism, because colonialism did not start in the 12th century. For instance, London, in the beginning of the 16th century, had 5,000 inhabitants. It was a big village, and then became what we know. On the other hand, my question is, you talked about colonialism, and I agree. But don't you believe that also neo-colonialism, which is typical of this historical period, is a major determinant of what you said? Because neo-colonialism brought within two phenomena, land grabbing. And land grabbing is destroying Africa. People do not realize yet, because perhaps they do not know how does it function. And land grabbing has to do with neo-colonialism, not colonialism. And the second phenomenon is that neocolonialism operates via consumption. And because you see, the young in Africa, they behave from the point of view of their lifestyle like our young people, because they are attracted by consumption, consumer goods linked to new technologies. So perhaps I would be curious to know whether or not it is proper to consider the role of neocolonialism, which maintains certain elements with the previous phenomenon, but it had something new.
Please, if
saying that he confirms that he will meet us on Friday at 12:15 in the Sala del Consistorium. So that is no, because there was an uncertainty until recently, because he's busy, he has something to do, etc. But now he confirmed, and so we are happy to. Excuse me. We hope.
I ask you that your answer is short, otherwise we move it to the general session.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we share the same definition of colonialism and neocolonialism. To us, neocolonialism means the continued influence of previous colonial elements in the life of an ex-colony. And if that is my understanding of, I was saying, I don't know if we share the same understanding of neocolonialism. To us, neocolonialism means the extension or the continued existence of the colonial influence on an ex-colony. Now, I agree with you when you say that observations on African society are no different from observations on other societies at some point in their development, in their historical development. We probably can bemoan our arrested development because most of the things that came in with colonialism. They had already happened. So to that extent, colonialism takes the blame mostly on most of the ills. There's quite a lot of debate that's going on in South Africa in academic circles, ranging from decolonization to Africanization to indigenization, etc., etc. There are emotive aspects to the debate. There are scientific aspects to the debate. Yes, the impact of modernization, if one wants to call it modernization, that's the technological, expanded knowledge base, etc., have been profound on African society to the extent of even changing the outlook of African society. One of the things that's happening now in South Africa in political, for instance, is the language question. A number of Africans in South Africa have started fearing that the indigenous languages might disappear. Let me just give you an example. I have 11 grandchildren. All of them, their first language is English. They can articulate themselves not very convincingly in my mother tongue, Zulu. My children are completely bilingual. They speak as much Zulu as they speak English, as I am. But my grandchildren are almost multilingual. And that's because of the influence. First of all, the better schools are English speaking. So children go to English speaking schools to start school. I only could articulate sentences in English in my 7th year of schooling. For the first 6 years of schooling, I couldn't converse convincingly in English. So you can see the difference. Thank you.
So much, but then